Before we go into your story, I'd actually love to talk about something that you often talk about in interviews, the fact that you are quote unquote risk adverse, which is interesting to see, right? As an entrepreneur, as someone who's built and been really at the helm of this high growth business, how did you become comfortable with this quote unquote risk and really go against those natural tendencies of yours of being, more risk adverse?
Yeah, I think probably the best way to start this is by explaining why I think I'm probably risk averse. So, a few things. When my parents moved to America from Taiwan at the time, and I was born in Minnesota. They went to grad school and they really came here in search of the American dream. My dad was an entrepreneur, and my dad, he had success in his life, and then at one point he didn't. So I think the reason why I wanted to be an entrepreneur was because I saw the difference between my mom and my dad. My dad really loved what he did, but he felt all of it, the highs and the lows. And you saw him like on the weekends, we would go to, he was a property developer, and he would take me to go look at like, condos being built. And you would go to a hotel, and he would be touching the elevators and trying to understand what was happening. And so I saw that, and then I saw my mom, and my mom had this 9 to 5 job. She was an auditor. I still can't tell you what she did. She never talked about it. She went to work at the same time every day. She came home at the same time every day. And so I think young age, I saw my dad, and I was like, that's what I want. I want to be so passionate. I want to care. But then truthfully, what happened was when I was in high school, my dad's business kind of fell apart. It was the financial markets, the construction, real estate, everything kind of fell apart. And at the time, he ended up closing down his business. And so I think like having seen that actually did make me very risk averse. In addition to the fact that, by the way, my dad, my entire life has been like, I get that you want to do this because I did it, but by the way, I don't think you should. I think it's way easier to go work for
Yeah.
someone and just build a career. So I think I had this background of like seeing it, wanting it. And then instead, I think my answer was just to prepare for it. So I worked for other people for a really long time. I went to business school. I majored in entrepreneurship. I told myself I was getting a seat at the table and I was really learning. And I think I did. But the truth is, by the time that I started, I mean, I was 40 when I started this business. When I went to go raise money, I was 40 years old. And I think at the time, I had 3 kids in private school and I had a mortgage. And we had a dual income. And so I think, it's pretty hard to afford those things in LA. And that's a real financial risk, right? To do that and also to think about starting a business was really hard for me, or to not make money, right? And the truth is, I probably wouldn't have done any of those things if I didn't get the opportunity that I did. So I am risk adverse. All that long-winded way of saying, yes, I am very risk adverse. I'm trying to have more of an abundance mindset. That is something that is really not so natural to me, I think. Um, but at the same time, I think what really did happen was I got an opportunity and I just couldn't. It felt like I would be crazy if I didn't chase it.
Yes. And oh my goodness, there's so many similarities actually with your father, how you were raised, and the dynamics that are very similar to my journey. So this definitely resonates a lot to me. And, I'm curious. So before we kind of go into that one opportunity that really pushed you into entrepreneurship, I'd love to hear more about. You were in consulting. That was a stable job, right? You go to undergrad, everyone either does like banking or consulting. So I get all that. And then you go to grad school. And like you said, you studied entrepreneurship. So you've always had that at the back of your mind. And from there, you ended up working at different beauty brands. So I'd love to hear kind of the transition between how you went from grad school and why you decided to go into beauty and really your aspirations at the time before you even started the business.
Yeah. So when I was in undergrad, I really never knew what I wanted to do, right? I had this like idea of entrepreneurship, but at the time, it's not like the world is today, right? That didn't really exist in a way that felt like it was achievable. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I did exactly what you said. I had my mom and dad actually sent me to go see this cousin of mine, and they were like, "Oh, you should go find out. She's successful. She went to Harvard. That's what every Asian parent does, right?" And she was like, "Listen, if you don't know what to do, you should go into consulting." And I went into consulting. And after that, I kind of felt like I had this, like, I don't know, I call it like my quarter life crisis, because I really was like, this is not what I want to do, but I don't know what I do want to do. And that's really the reason I went to business school. And I read all these books called, like, I don't know if you ever read What Color is My Parachute, or there's these iconic books, What Should I Do with My Life? And I was trying to figure out what I wanted. And I think in the end, it's interesting because I'm actually not obsessed with makeup, right? Like, I'm not a makeup junkie. I'm not the kind of person that walks into Sephora and I'm like, you can't hold me back because I just want to fill up my basket. That is not actually what's in it for me. I think I wanted to work with a product because I wanted something tangible, and I wanted to be able to see something that I put into the world, and I wanted it to relate to women and people that I could understand. And specific to makeup, I think the thing I really love about makeup is makeup makes people happy, and it makes them feel more confident about themselves. And I genuinely do believe that if you feel more confident, the way that you walk through the world is different, and your ability to, like, do things and approach life is changed. And so that's what it was for me. So I ended up trying. I remember going to see my career counselor when I was in business school, and I was like, okay, what I really want to do is entrepreneurship, and specifically I want to do beauty, but I don't know how that works. So what I'm going to do is go work for other people. I think it should be beauty or fashion. And I was like, I think fashion is a little too subjective, right? Like, it's always like, who knows what's going to be trendy. And I thought beauty was a little bit more linear. Like, it has cycles, there's data involved. It's easier to make a right decision. And I'm a bit more of a linear thinker. And so that's why I decided to go into beauty. But I think, kind of like what you said, I took the safer route, which is I'm going to learn on someone else's dime. And that's what I did. So I went to go work for, when I was in business school, I started working at Smashbox Cosmetics. Then I went to Kate Somerville. Then I went to Josie Maran. And then I spent 4 years working for kind of local indie brands and consulting, and actually took some time off from a full-time role. So I took 4 years where I had my third child. And I think that's very much a big part of my journey too, is I wanted it all. Like, I still do want it all. I
Yeah.
want to have a family. I want to have a strong marriage. I want to have friends. I want to,
Yes.
in addition to the fact that I want to be an entrepreneur. And I think it's hard, I think, sometimes, because we compare ourselves to other people. And I think a lot of times during my journey, I've looked at other people and been like, I'm not there. I'm not fast enough. I'm not doing it. Because I didn't start doing this until I didn't raise money until I was 40. I'm 44 now. I raised money 4 years ago and I ended up launching 3 years ago. So I guess for anyone listening to this, one thing I really would like people to know is, like, I just don't think there's a right time. I think it's very specific to you. And I don't think it's too late anymore. I think there's no prototype for, like, exactly how you should do this and what it looks like.
Yeah, and what I love so much about that is you mentioned something in terms of working with other brands so you can learn on their dime, and I think that is game changing. And I know you mentioned you were still a little bit nervous to go and take the leap to start your business, but always give that advice to people. If you could go work for other entrepreneurs or other industries that you might see yourself with, you do build that confidence, and that really helped me. And I had a very similar position to you, but I think starting a business a little bit later, having some experience could really give you that confidence to eventually go out on your own. So I don't know if you felt that same way as well from that experience.
100%. And I also didn't have, I mean, part of the reason is because I didn't have a landing pad, right? Like, if it didn't go well, I didn't have the I was afraid in so many ways. But I think the other thing that you mentioned, confidence, is I think getting closer and having a seat at the table and working directly with founders, it kind of demystified it for me, right? So the
Hmm.
closer I got to it, I mean, not to say that, like, the other people I worked with, like, they're good at different things than I'm good at, right? But I just realized that it just normalized it. So you're like, oh, like, I don't know, I didn't go to Harvard. So I remember when I was younger, I was like, it was so prestigious for my parents to be in the Ivy League. Like, it was such a big deal. And I went to a UC. And so I remember feeling like, oh, maybe is a really scary thing. Like, today, my best friend went to Harvard, and I'm like, oh, yeah, not to say it's not a big deal, but just like, oh, like it's not that crazy, you know? Like it just sort of demystifies.
I love that. Yeah, and I think that's important and a big reason of why I wanted to have these conversations because similar to you, I remember I never thought I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, never thought I really had the chops yet. And then I worked at a tech company and he's a serial entrepreneur, like raised 15 million on an idea. And I remember sitting in that room being like the sixth employee and I'm like, wow, nobody knows what they're doing, right? Like even the successful entrepreneur. Yeah, and like you said, demystifying it.
And that's exactly what I mean. And I don't, by the way, I don't mean to make light of like Harvard is very hard to get into. Like it's a
Yeah.
big deal. I just meant like I think sometimes um we don't give ourselves the credit and we don't allow ourselves to think things are possible because we compare ourselves to other people's resumes or other people like what we think somebody else might have and that we don't have that thing. And I think the closer you can get to it, you realize like we're all kind of a hot mess, right? Like
Yeah.
every company I've worked at, big or small, like because a lot of the companies I've worked at were small and got bigger, and like it all always comes down to process, communication, like everything's messy. It's just a different kind of messy at different points. But we're all people, right? So I remember someone saying to me once that every business is like a long shadow of its founder or its leader. I think that's kind of true. And like all of us are fallible too. So it's just different ways of doing it. But it did give me a lot more confidence. And the other thing it gave me is it gave me a lot more resources, right? So now I don't know the answer. The truth is, I thought I knew more going into this than I actually do. I think the world has changed a lot. And I think, like you, just because you have worked near someone doesn't mean you know how to do their job. Like I understand every vertical in terms of what it does, but that doesn't mean I'm good at doing that job. And I think it was a really humbling experience because I had told myself, like, oh, I've worn lots of different hats. I've worked at small companies. I could do this. But no, actually, I can't. But the benefit I've had compared to maybe someone who started this like out of college or something is that I have like a direct line into like a friend who's like the VP of ops at another company or like you know what I mean? Like just the ability to have resources and ask questions. I think that's a huge benefit I've had. And that all felt like de risking to me, like just doing something where I had resources or people to turn to was hugely beneficial.
Oh, I think that's so key. And I always tell people, like, if you can foster those relationships now, you never know where they could land you in the future. And we'll kind of talk about your journey in a few key moments from people who were in your network from the past. But before, you even going and starting Tower 28, one thing you mentioned, so you were working with all these founder led brands, you were building the confidence, really seeing what it took to build a business. But like you said, you had three kids in the middle of all this, and you really did slow down a little bit, I believe, by your third. And you mentioned this in another interview, but you took some time off to raise your kids and you were a bit scared that, maybe your skill set was somewhat irrelevant and you had more of that fear of failure. So tell me more about, your mindset at the time, because I think that's relatable for so many women who might kind of take a pause in their career to kind of focus on personal life.
Yeah, I think it's such it's a hard thing because in our society, a few things. One, I think it's pretty expensive to when you're young, right? And you're having kids, you're kind of generally if you're doing it in your 30s, you're kind of just or like near that, you're kind of just getting to the point where your career starting to kick in. So like I literally got my first head of marketing role. I was the head of marketing at Kate Somerville and I got pregnant almost like in the same breath. And I was like, wait, this is not the way it was supposed to go, right? Like I'm trying to like put my gas on my career, put the gas on my career, but at the same time, I'm like having a kid. And I think it's really hard. And there was a point at which I had two kids and I was a VP of marketing at Josie Maran and that company was growing really quickly and we were, things were going well as a business, but I myself had this feeling of like, I feel like I'm doing a lot of things but I'm not doing anything really well. And I think that's a really hard place to be in because if you really want to you want to feel like the things that you are putting out into the world are like worth doing, right? And I think especially like having young children, I think in America is very expensive and we don't do a good job of supporting mothers and we don't make it easy. Like the cost of childcare in Los Angeles is very high. And so I don't know. I was not super happy, to be honest with you, because I felt like I was juggling and I felt like I was failing. And so long story short, I quit my job and I took 4 years off and then I spent some time consulting. And I was worried and I kept my toe in the water because I was afraid, frankly, that I wouldn't be able to go back when I was ready to. And I also didn't know when I would go back. It wasn't like a planned sabbatical where it was like, okay, and in 4 years I'm going back. Because I think if you knew what was going to come after, you could enjoy where you are, but that's just not the way that life works, right? But I also knew it was really important to me to have this experience of being with my kids and my family, and I'm lucky enough that it was something that my husband could support. And so I did do that. But I think there's so many moms I meet that feel like they have to make that choice. I feel really grateful and lucky that I was able to have a I think it was because I had a strong enough of a resume that I could go back, right? But I think it's hard. It's hard. I mean, the truth is I think anyone probably could go back. It just depends on what they want to do and if you what you want to do and how you're set up, but I don't think society helps us very much in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think, like you kind of mentioned, you kind of kept one toe in the water of just consulting so you can stay relevant. And I've just heard a lot of women on the podcast say that as well. Is like they took a break, but they were consulting. Like they were just a little afraid to be out of the loop because you don't really know where things can be in a few years and whatnot. But
I mean, listen, when I started Tower 28, I didn't even have an Instagram account. Like I personally wasn't even on Instagram. So it's like I just wasn't part of that world and I didn't participate in it. I was like it just wasn't my thing yet. And so I think you can learn anything if you're a smart person, and I think the world before and now, like I've worked in the industry for a long time, it hasn't really changed, but it's democratized, right? So influence has always been important. We've always looked up to, it just used to be we looked up to celebrities and editors because they were the ones who had the power of influence. And now it's been democratized into, Instagram influencers and TikTok influencers and experts that are more everyday. Um, but yeah, I think it's as long as I guess I would say, because I think that's kind of your point, and what I would wish I had known is as long as you are smart and capable and willing to learn and curious, I think you'll be able to go back after having kids, and it's okay to take a break. But I would recommend doing what we just talked about, and even for the sake of your resume, like keeping a toe in the water and keeping your context fresh and keeping your mind fresh.
yeah. And so that just kind of leads me to, in terms of Tower 28, I know you wanted to start a business, but never really were sure how to do it because, like you said, you guys had 3 kids, you had a mortgage, financial stability was important to you, even when you took some time off between your gigs. But tell me more about how this one conversation really completely shifted the way
Yeah.
you thought about entrepreneurship, or maybe the few steps before that as
Yeah,
well.
so I went to business school, like I mentioned, and I had a friend named Charles, and he was the co-president of the Entrepreneurship and Venture Management Association. And when we graduated from business school, he went and started a company, and I did not, right? Like I didn't have the balls to do that. And so I met with him at one point when I had taken this kind of hiatus of sorts, and he and I went to coffee, and I was telling him, I was like, okay, I want to go back full time. My daughter had just started preschool, and I was like, this feels like the right moment. So my third was in preschool at the time, and I was like, this is what I want. I want, something with a lot of equity. I want upside. I want a big role, all these things. And he looked at me and he was like, you've been saying for years now that you wanted to do something on your own. You're kind of getting old. Why aren't you like shit or get off the pot? Like, why aren't you doing it? And I said to him, I was like, listen, I don't have the money and I don't have a partner. And so instead, I'm just going to go work for someone. And he said to me, he was like, well, if you have money, you don't need a partner. You can go hire people. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I still don't have money. And he was like, well, if you have a great idea, then why don't I be your first money in and I will give you half of whatever you need? And he's like, how much do you think you need? And coincidentally, I had just been hired to write somebody else's business plan, and they, based on their business plan, they needed 250,000. And I was like, well, I just did this business plan and they need 250. And he's like, well, if you think you need 250, you need 500. So if I will give you 250 if you can raise the other 250 within 30 days. So what happened is he had sold his company and he wanted to roll over, he wanted to invest in something else so he could like roll over and avoid capital gains or whatever. And so he had a very finite window that he needed to do this within, or else he couldn't do it, right? And the beauty of it was it kind of gamified things for me, right? Like it was an opportunity, and either I was going to meet this opportunity or I was going to let it go. And I think having that like kick in the butt and like it was so good for me. And also he gave me terms. He was like, these are the terms I want. Go and shop them. Don't trust me just because I'm your friend. See if people, respond to it. And if they tell you that I'm a jerk, then don't do it. And I think that was such a good advice. And I always say, like, don't ask people for money, ask them for advice. I genuinely was looking for advice, right? So I did start, like, I had this opportunity. I started asking people, you know, what are these good terms? I have this opportunity. I think I'm gonna take it, but what do you think? And so many people were like, you've been saying you want to do this for years, like, because everybody in my life had known, and I don't even know if I quite knew how much I had verbalized it. But I think that's another thing I would tell people is like, if there's something that you want in the world, you do need to go out and tell people because they will think of you, right? Like when I was in business school, I became the person where if anyone knew anything about beauty, they would come tell me because they were like, oh, wait, I know somebody. And I was the one person, right? So I think like if you can identify, like tell people in the world, this is this thing that I want to do, they will come to you. And it is a little woo woo, but I believe in that kind of like manifestation of it. But anyway, so I had this opportunity and I was able to raise the money after that. And I feel like when I tell this story, sometimes people think like, oh, you're just friends with like rich people. It was actually not like that. It was like people who used to work with me, people who used to work for me, friends, people would come in with their like sister or brother and be like, okay, can I give you a smaller check, but I'll get somebody else to do it. And then word kind of even got out, and like my neighbor was like, "Wait, I heard you're doing this thing. Can I get in?" And it did happen, but I think, and even now, I think some people say like, "Oh, it feels like Tower 28 happened really quickly. Like you've had so much success so fast." I do feel lucky that things have happened fairly quickly, but at the same time, I'm like, I've worked in the same industry for a really long time. It was 14 years before, like I've been percolating and thinking about this for 14 years before I started. So I was planting the seeds and like creating those relationships that were so important in advance. Maybe not knowing that that's what I was doing, but that is what happened. So yes, that was a conversation that happened. And after that, I was lucky. And then we pulled our kids out of private school because that is really expensive. And I started.
Yeah, and I love that you talked about that because it's kind of like the realities of shifting your lifestyle for, how your family dynamics are going to change when one person is taking so much risk. So I appreciate you sharing that. And, one thing that I just wanted to highlight, some people might look at you and say that you're quote unquote lucky, but like you said, you were not intimidated to put yourself out there. And I think because you said you were looking for advice, right? It's a little bit easier to connect with people in your past and old colleagues when you're like, hey, I have this idea, which is so important to talk about. Like, what advice do you have? So even you being open to do that is a big deal. And a lot of people might at that point kind of stop and be scared to ask people for quote unquote money. But the way you approached it was unique in terms of advice.
Totally. And I think even when I talk to someone, even if they said no, because it's not like everybody I talked to said yes, but sometimes they would say, like, actually, you know what, though, you should talk to this and this person. Or I would ask, I would say, okay, you don't do this type of investing. Do you know anyone else that does? And they would put me in touch with people. And I definitely have people on my cap table that I didn't know at all before this. And I definitely also met with people who were like, this is a terrible idea. Don't do this, So there's both versions of it, and I think it's really easy to just focus on the easy part. And certainly
Yeah.
I feel like I did feel like I caught a break. But even catching a break, like Charles, this friend of mine, yes, I'm lucky that he was able to do it and he chose me, but at the same time, that was a relationship that was created over a long period of time. And I just think, even you said this earlier, like nurturing relationships and just being kind with no expectation and being, I always think people, you earn the reputation that you have, right? And so even I say this all the time to my team, it's probably the thing that I care about the most is reputation. Right. So like get back to people. Like if you can't do it, it's okay. Just like tell me that you're not going to be able to do it.
The power of communication is so key in like every life stage you're in, and just how you, like you said, reputation is big. And it's cool to even see, similar to you, just to emphasize how important it is. I also am a little bit later in my life, had multiple careers before, and so many people from my past are here to support. But I will say, like similar to your opportunity with Charles, when you see an opportunity, like you jump on it, right? You jumped on it. And I feel like that is something I do as well. So you can call it luck, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes to, right, jump on that opportunity. And, I'm curious, when you were having this conversation with Charles, did you have an exact idea around what you wanted to bring into the world? Like, did you have your first product idea, or where were you at the time with your business?
So this is actually something I have not talked about a lot publicly, but I actually started three businesses before this one, all of which obviously have failed. And I think if I look at those three businesses, the commonality there is I was banking on someone else's idea and somebody else's know how. Like I really wanted a partner. And I think it goes back to me being risk adverse. And I was like, okay, well, you're smart, you're good. Like, I'll do the work. And a few of these deals were that, like, I'll do the work, you're the money, whatever it is. And I wasn't taking a bet on myself. And I think partly, I think the reason why this has gone well is it was the first time that I was like, well, what if we solve a problem that I have and put
Mm,
myself in it more? And that was really the biggest difference. So no, I had the idea for what Tower 28 is. So Tower 28 is truthfully, is the intersection of not only clean beauty, but it is clean, non-toxic beauty that is safe for sensitive skin. And eczema is something that I have suffered with for my entire adult life. Like from the time I graduated from college, I've had issues with eczema. And I think one of the things that was really hard for me is working in the beauty industry. Like I don't know, even if no one says it to you, you implicitly feel like when you tell someone you work in the beauty industry that they expect you to have like perfect skin and that you know how to do your makeup. And I was the person who was pitching Sephora and everybody else on like the latest and greatest, whatever it is. And I was like, but don't look at my skin, don't look at my face. And it really, now it's not so bad. Before it was very extreme for me. Like it would show up on my face, it would show up on my hands and behind my legs and joints. And so really like, it's interesting because Tower 28 was the first time I really was like, well, what is something I would want in the world and a problem I can solve, as opposed to, I think, putting my energy and efforts into solving, like, taking someone else's dream and helping to make it come true, which is actually something I told myself I was quite good at. Like, I was a pretty good number two, right? I was good at writing. I used to write like Kate Somerville and Josie. I would write all their speeches for them. I would do all of their PR stuff for them. And I felt like I was really good at actualizing someone else's dream. And when it came to me, I don't think I had the confidence initially to be like, oh, anyone would care about my what I thought, or what my dream was. And so I do think that's a huge part of what has made me successful in this role, is I think I've been able to kind of find my voice.
yeah. And when you met with Charles, did you have an idea about the first product at the time? No, you didn't.
No, I didn't know. I didn't expect it at the time, but I think I did percolate on the concept, and it really always was like, oh, I wish there was, I'd gone to Sephora myself many times and been like, hey, I have really sensitive skin. What kind of like, but I really want to cover it up. What kind of makeup do you have for me? And they would always take me to like either Bare Minerals or First Aid Beauty. And there is nothing wrong with those brands, but I wanted something that was a little more fun and a little more representative of like, I don't know, my lifestyle. And so that's really what I wanted. So like the concept and the idea I think had been there, but it wasn't until this conversation that I really had to like put pen to paper and be like, but what does it really look like for me?
Mhm, mhm. And I think just taking that time because all of us have these different ideas, right? Like I'm always like, one day I'll start this, or, there's so many things floating in the ether. But when you sit down and really think about, okay, how do I create that into a product or create it, tangibly, just carving out that time, I think is really game changing because we all have different ideas. And, one thing I'm curious about, because you can easily say, especially as someone who's worked in beauty, you've seen so many different products. And I'm sure you had people, family members or friends say, you know what, Amy, like it is so saturated. Beauty is not easy by any means. So, how did you kind of get over that hurdle? Because I'm sure you even had access to so many different brands that we don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, you're right. I am a little bit cynical, right? And even now, like I see things or someone will pitch me something or we'll talk about a product and I'm like, oh, but so and so already did that like 10 years ago. And even speaking to how deflating that process can be, my dad, I think I mentioned this earlier, right? He was a huge inspiration for me, and being an entrepreneur. Like I pitched my dad when I was raising money and I was like, I've got this opportunity. I've got this like money. He was one of those people I went to for advice, and he sat and he listened to my whole pitch and he was like, yeah, I'm not going to give you money. I think this sounds hard. Like, I think it sounds like it's really noisy and hard. And he was very pragmatic about it, but he was like, it's just not, I just don't think I'm going to get my money back, on a very, very pragmatic basis. And it was soul crushing to me at the time, because part of you is like, oh, wait, he's right.
Yeah.
And I would argue that's true 100%. Like it is a really very crowded market in everything right now. What beverages, anything you want
Yeah.
to name, right? Every category is really very, very crowded. But I think you have to have a point of view and a point of difference, and you have to believe that what you're putting into the world is going to fill a need gap. Um, and not just be the same as everything else. And then I think if you can find that intersection of all of those things, then I think you do have a shot at it. But it is hard to push past, like what you're saying, the awareness that, like it's interesting because I always have thought about this, but like Josie and Katie specifically, from Josie Maran and Kate Somerville, I remember because I used to do the press for them. Every time people would always ask them, are you surprised by your success? And they would both always say, no, I always knew that this was going to be successful. I always knew. And when people ask me that, I'm like, I had no idea. No, I did not have, maybe my investors would not want me to say that, but because I did obviously take money from them. But like I was panicked, and I took, by the way, I took money from I took money from my friends. I took money from the people I vacation with, I go to dinner with. Like um it wasn't risk free in a different way, right? Like it felt really heavy for me. And now it's good, but like my best friend and I had a lot of conversations. She invested and we had a lot of conversations about, well, what happens if this doesn't go well? Are we going to be okay? Um, I don't know. A long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. And just kind of thinking about, I had a very similar experience. And obviously, I'm, only a year into my journey, so very early compared to you. But, when people do, I guess when I launched the business, I knew similarly to you, I had a mission, like an overarching mission of what I was passionate about because of my own problem and my own need. But the product, I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I was like, we might be too early. It might be complicated. Like, how can we put it out there? And similar to kind of like, I think the way you thought about it, I wasn't sure how it was going to be, but did you know that whether this product, your first hero product, if that didn't work out, did you have faith that you would figure something out under that umbrella of like your overall mission for Tower 28?
Yeah, I think I knew what I wanted to do. Like what I wanted, I knew the answer. I knew the question I was trying to answer. And the question I was trying to answer was basically, I wanted people to feel safe using my
Yeah.
products.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted people, whether that meant, and that's, we adhere by, the Clean at Sephora list. We adhere by the national, we're actually the only makeup brand that 100% adheres to the National Eczema Association's no list. And I think, like, again, to your point about having experience, like along the way of my career journey, I was sort of like, well, I don't know why we're making that decision or that decision. Like, And I think a lot of that shows up in our products, meaning like, Kate Somerville's a beautiful line, but it was a very prestige, expensive line. And so we spent a lot of money on packaging. And I was like, could I do this and not spend money on packaging and pass on the savings to my customer? Right. And it's just a different goal, right? Like it's a different price point. But those were like, I kind of collected over time, like things that felt like my values about what I wanted this to be. And I knew the umbrella. I just didn't know how it was going to be manifested exactly. And then as we went, but I knew things like, I didn't want to have extras, both from a sustainability perspective and from a cost perspective, because I wanted the price point to be accessible. So if you look at our compacts, for instance, we don't have a pan just because it's unnecessary. We do a hot pour, which means we pour directly into the component. We don't have a mirror. Um, we use a component that doesn't have any tooling, meaning we're not paying huge upfront fees. We're using things that are actually kind of stock, but then we're customizing it by decorating it in our own way. And we're able to pass on those. But I wanted it to also be at Sephora. I wanted it to be like this accessible price point in a prestige environment, and that somebody still felt proud pulling out of their purse because, I think some people want that, like, or so everybody wants like a little bit of that treat feeling, right? So no, I think to your point, like I knew what I wanted, but I think the journey of figuring out how it shows up for you, that is a bit of a process,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I know there was a story, and I think it goes back to one thing you mentioned earlier is like how important it is to always be learning and be curious. And I think like one of your friends or her husband was surfing and he was putting something on his body and had a unique ingredient. So tell me more about that story because I think sometimes like just being very open minded and curious about what's going on around you could spark different ideas for, what your product could be.
Actually, such a good point, Yasmin, because what happened was I really felt like, and again, like I'm a linear thinker. I was a consultant. I went to business school, right? And I was like, okay, here's a need gap. I think there's a lot of product in the skincare market that is good for sensitive skin, but not in makeup. So this is where I'm going to go. And if I had been so rigid about that, then I wouldn't have ever seen this. But what happened is exactly what you're saying. So at the time, I had a graphic designer person, an art director, who came to me and she was like, "Hey, my husband has been using, he's a surfer and he gets reef cuts and he's been using this product and it has hypochlorous acid in it. And I'm reading the bottle and it says it's good for reef cuts, but it's really what it's good for is it's anti inflammatory and antibacterial. And you're telling me, because I was telling her all about like, eczema and all these things for the products because we were trying to work on the art and everything. And she's like, based on everything you're telling me, I feel like this might be really good for your skin. And so I tried it and it helped because I used to get eczema on my body, and it helped my body, but it didn't help my face. And it was enough to be like, well, maybe there's something here. And I ended up finding a chemist. I interviewed multiple chemists, but I found a chemist who had been working on this for 8 years to make it stable. I met with him, and he kept playing with the formulation, playing with the concentration, the pH, all these different things. And we found one that was working for my skin. And so then I got 100 little bottles and we started sending it out to kind of anyone that me and the two like young girls that were working with me, who are still with me, by the way, I'm super proud of that. And we gave it out to people just to hear what they thought, and the response was amazing. And it was everything from one of the girls I'd interning for me at the time. She had a boob job and she was spraying it on the incision, and her doctor was like, I've never seen anybody heal that quickly. What are you using? To me with my eczema, another person with their acne, somebody else like was using it post sweat, another I mean, it was like all of these weird use cases. And everybody was like, what is this? Like, it felt like, and we still call it this, like the Windex of like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, that movie, where like you just keep spraying it on everything and it works. And it's kind of true. But like to your point about being curious and open-minded, like I was like, listen, I'm building this brand for people who have sensitive skin, and this seems to work for everybody with sensitive skin, whatever your issue is, because the two main things with skin are any skin condition you have really is at the end of the day some form of inflammation. And the thing that makes any inflammation worse is bacteria. So your skin wants to heal itself, right? Like if you were to get a cut, it wants to heal itself. but you need to help create the what this product does is help create the environment so it can heal itself because it's calming and soothing, and then it's also going to help keep it clean because our bodies want to do that for itself. But now it's honestly it's our number one selling SKU, which is crazy because it's in the makeup area, and I like really was like, no one's gonna know what this is, but it's kind of created its own cult following and sold itself. We actually just Haley Bieber just posted us
Oh
this
my
week, and I
god,
almost died.
amazing! Congratulations. And tell me more. So do you put this on before your makeup, like on clean skin? How does that product specifically work?
Yeah, so I would think of it as a replacement for your toner.
Oh,
So I use
great.
it like cleanse and then tone and then moisturize is how I think of it. But in the morning, frankly, I don't even clean my skin like a with a cleanser, mostly because I am dry and so I want all the oils from the night before. But yeah, so and you can use it throughout the day. You can use it on the go. You can use it over makeup. I do think you get more benefit of using it on clean skin personally.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's been a really fun and wild ride, and I think the coolest part about it is that it's been so organic. Like I said, like Haley Bieber, I tried DMing her and offering her product and nothing, and then all of a sudden she just posted and like I've asked other people to gift her nothing. She must have bought it herself. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah. Oh my god, I literally have goosebumps, and I think it's just a testament to creating like a good quality product that works. Like you always hear about word of mouth, but it's true. Like now that I'm kind of living in this world and seeing word of mouth on my own, like it is true. The virality that can come from that, and just seeing like a few years in how Hailey Bieber just had her hands on it. If you just focus on a good solution in a unique way, like
Totally.
you never know what can happen, right?
If you, I mean, and this is something I'm really proud of too, but if you look at our, like on our product page, all the before and afters that we have were sourced by the community. It
Mm,
was literally like people in our community posting and saying, like, this thing worked and it helped me so much. And then we would just reach out and be like, do you have a before and after that you'd like to share with us? Because we'd love to share with our
yeah.
community. And in return, we'll give you another bottle of SOS. But we wouldn't do it unless somebody said that they already had this experience. And that's what all our before and afters are. So it really is genuinely true and organic.
Ugh, and that's what I think makes just like running a business so exciting is like it's you have really tough days, but when you really see the impact with someone, I'm like, this is why I'm doing it, right? Like that energy you get is game changing.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, it is my favorite part of like, we don't have we're still not a big company. We don't have a big team. So we're not like in the stores all the time or anything like that. But when I do get to meet people and they tell me things or like I read the reviews and they
Yeah,
say like this changed my skin, I understand so much what it's like to have problematic skin um, and feel self-conscious that if I can do that for somebody else, it's so meaningful to me, but just because I really understand what it's like.
totally. No, I love that. I love everything you guys are doing. And, one thing that just kind of talking about your background, you're very strong operationally and product development, but you even mentioned you didn't even have an Instagram, right? Like, how did you guys create awareness in the early days? Because it's not like you had a big budget and a big team, and you might have a network, but in terms of influence on your own, that didn't exist at the time.
No, I have no influence of my own. I mean, maybe now. Well, it's interesting, right? Like you said, the influence I had was probably more, I was well connected and I am well connected in the beauty industry, right? So I was lucky enough that, like, I noticed, for instance, one of our, I think at the time we were getting like 50 or 100 likes on our little mood board, but one of them was from the woman who ended up becoming our merchant at Sephora, like the buyer I was friends with because I knew her from back in the day. I mean, granted, we were not best friends or anything like that, but enough that she was paying attention.
Yeah,
And so, yes, I had some connections going into it, but I think the bigger one is like, honestly, influence. Like, we started with an Instagram mood board. I think we got really, really lucky that we had retail partners really early. So that's something I really leaned into. So Credo launched us very quickly. And then Sephora, frankly, 6 months after we launched, we were on Sephora. So we got really lucky. And then when we went into store, we went into all stores at the same time, which is something that happens almost never. Um, so super grateful for all of that. And I think we've been very lucky to work with partners that just know how to build brands and really know how to support us and have been so great. So that's definitely part of it. The other part of it is I think we were really like hustling, and I will give a lot of credit to the young girls on my team because they knew who was cool much better than I did. But we would literally build these lists of like, okay, well, who are the influencers that we want to gift? And now I would not recommend this, but back then we would just blind gift people.
Even if they didn't
And
respond back to you?
yeah, we would look for like on people's like YouTube page, they have their address sometimes. And we would just send people things. And one of those people actually was Nicole Guerrero. I don't know if you know who she is. Nicole Guerrero is like an old school beauty influencer. She's been around for a long time. She's like huge. And we sent out these influencer boxes that were so unimpressive. And granted, this is like back when, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, they were sending like life-size beauty blenders. People were just really, it was like very ostentatious. And we sent like a little box. I mean, it said it was a branded box, but it had shred in it and just our products. That's it, with a handwritten note. And we sent products. I'll never forget. We sent products to Nicole Guerrero, and she posted unboxing, which a lot of people post unboxings. And then she posted herself using it. And then she posted herself buying, like
Stop.
screenshotting herself, like what video of her buying more and being like, oh my God, I love this so much. I'm going to buy 3 more of them. And overnight, it was like something, I literally was like, did we get hacked? Because I didn't know it went up. And I was like, because all of a sudden our follower count went up, our views went up, like everything kind of went up. And I was like, something happened. And we started getting all these orders. And I think it's like that, to your point about virality, like when you know somebody doesn't have to buy things, they get gifted things, then you're like, wait, this product is really good. And it's funny because I still don't really have a relationship with Nicole Guerrero. Like after we gifted her, we sent her flowers, we whatever. Like I don't really know her, to be honest with you, and I don't know if she quite realizes like the impact she
Yeah.
had at such an early stage. And by that I don't just mean the money or the orders, but I think, and you probably understand this, Yasmin, but in these early days you really need these moments of validation where you're like, oh my gosh, this is working. Like this thing that I put into the world is good and I should keep going. And it actually really means so much to me. And I think I never really understood that so much until doing this. And now I actually try much harder to support smaller businesses because I don't think I knew how important it was. Like I honestly, I tip better now than I used to. I
Yeah.
like,
Me too.
I just think more about it, like I will listen to these podcasts, and I'll go buy the thing from the person because I'm like, oh wow, like it matters, right? In I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, it's so true because especially so early on, you're just so much more vulnerable and you might see your product working with some people, but the fact that people take the time to post and talk about it and like you said, it really can change the trajectory of your business so early on. And we also had, I think like it was the first month we had an influencer buy our product and I was like, her name looks familiar, but it didn't click. And then she was so kind to talk about her experience. Shout out to Mama Jotes. She's amazing. And it was a genuine testimonial. And it was just such a proud moment for me. And then like another doctor also changed the trajectory for us. And I was like, wow, like the impact that they make in such a vulnerable stage when you're so early is really game changing. So I think about it like you all the time. Like I'm also like tipping people, like just anywhere. I just know the work and the empathy is just so much bigger nowadays now that I like started something and I'm running a business. So I,
Totally.
yeah.
And I think, the other thing I remember early on, a business person, an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur I know, I said to him, I was like, okay, what should I be paying attention to? Like, what do you want me to, how do I define success? Like, what are the metrics I should be looking at? What are the KPIs? And he was like, Amy, like the only thing you should think about is momentum. Just listen to your customer. Like, what does your customer want? And like, keep listening and because he was saying that the momentum part of it, like these proof points you really like psychologically, you need them to keep going. Because sometimes it's really hard. Like I think on Instagram versus reality, right? Like sometimes we tell these stories and it just is like, oh, first she raised this money, it was super easy. Then she went into all Sephora's, it was super easy. And you're not telling the story of the in between where it's like, oh, well, actually, everyone told her it was really ugly and she didn't know if she should launch it and she was scared. All these moments that are not so sexy, or like that you launched and the only orders you got were from
Yeah.
people who were your friends.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Or like the days where you're not getting like that many orders, or the operational issues that goes on behind the scenes. Like, I mean, I would love to talk to you for like another podcast. I'm sure even getting to Sephora nationally, like I'm just thinking on the back end, like that must have just been so much work. Like there's so many moving parts to just create that product that, we don't even have enough time to talk through. So yes, it's not always
I mean, I
glamorous.
was this is a true story, but we were just in a meeting right before this, and we spent like photo shoots are very expensive, and models have you can only use they have rights, right? So you only get to use them for like 2 years, and and then one of the girls on my team was like, that we have to do another photo shoot because those photos are going to expire. And literally I almost started
Oh,
crying.
yeah.
I was like, you want me to spend how much more money?
Oh, yeah.
It's really hard. Like you feel like there are days where I just feel like you're catching me on one where I'm like, I just like feel like everything's like just you're just like all day, like, okay, fine, I'll pay that rush fee, fine.
Yes. Oh my
Oh,
gosh. No.
it's gonna be late again. Okay, fine, I'll do you just feel like you're getting bad news all day long. And then you read, like, it's small things too. It's like you read a review and someone's like, this really changed my skin. And I don't know, like
Yeah.
Eva Chen posted this morning. We've gifted her so many times. And like she posted this morning, like, this is the lip gloss that made me believe in lip gloss again. And I was like, what?
It's so funny because similarly, like the past 3 days have been so chaotic for me, and I'm like, "Is Mercury in retrograde? Like, what is going on?" And they're like, "No, it's not." I don't know what's going on, but similar to you, I have a really big production run that, we're still early, I'm still involved with it, very hands-on, and like every single thing that could happen with getting our seeds on time just happened. Like they called me and said, "You know what? It didn't ship." And I was like, "I'm about to do a massive run." Like it didn't work out. And even then other seeds had issues. I was having nightmares last night, like so many moving parts of,
Oh,
right? It's
I have never, my sleep hygiene
yeah.
has never been worse. I drink more coffee than I've ever had. I take melatonin
Yes.
at night. I'm a hot mess because I can't, I'm just racing all the time. I'm always trying to think of like my to-do list, everybody else's to-do list. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm also like, I have to pause and be like, I get to have this opportunity to do this thing that I always wanted to do.
Yeah, exactly. It's like getting yourself back in gratitude of like how you get to do this, and also like leaning into your customers that you make such an impact for. You're like, okay, all this stresses, it's worth it. And you know what? At the end of the day, even with those rush fees, because I'm dealing with that too, it always works out somehow. Like, I don't know, somehow it works out. Maybe it's like our hustle behind the scenes and the stress of making things happen, but it somehow always does. But I just want to say that because I completely am in that same mindset of just chaos right now. So I get that.
If anybody else out there is listening, you're doing great. It's
Exactly.
so
It is. And we totally get it. But hopefully it's worth it at the end of the day. And one thing, oh, I just realized we're hitting up on our time, but I'd love to end on one last question. You mentioned early on in the interview, as well as a dinner that we were at together, like you are so passionate about work, your husband, your friends, your family, self-care, like you want all of this. So, clearly with a high growth business, it's tough to kind of manage everything. So what is your state of mind? I know this week is probably unique with everything you have to do with the photo shoot, but like, how are you kind of managing all these moving parts in your life? And I selfishly ask because we don't have kids yet, but it's something I often think about a lot. And I do get anxious thinking about it. So,
yeah. I don't think there's a right I mean, it's like the question of like, when should you have a business? When should you have kids? When should you start? There's no right answer, right? And I think it's never easy. Like people like having one kid wasn't easy for me, having two wasn't easy, having three kids is not easy. So like, and now I feel like this business is my fourth child. Um, I I really take it to heart when I'm sure you've heard this quote before too, but like that you can have it all, but you just can't have it all at once. And I think that's true. And I think the thing that I'm happy that I did in my life is I think I've taken time to not ignore different parts of my life, but I have focused on certain things at different points. So one would argue, like when I took time off from my job in a full time capacity, I was choosing my family. And I think if I hadn't done that and I hadn't put the time in and really this part might have been harder. I mean, maybe this is my own experience, so it's harder for me to say, but like I don't know. I think you can't just be like, okay, but then one day I'm going to be happy. Later, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to work really hard and I'm going to ignore my friends. I'm going to ignore my family. And then later, when I just have a bunch of money, I'll be happy or something like that. I don't think that's really the way it goes. Like, you can't, it's okay to focus on different things at different times, but you can't let go of anything ever, right? Like you have to pay attention because I think a lot of times we think about, I'll be happy when. And I think that's a really dangerous game to play because even for me, like, do I think about exiting? Sure, I'd love to sell the company because to me, it feels like graduation. Like the idea of doing, frankly, anything for the rest of my life feels hard.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to sell the company, but at the same time, like if I'm not having fun today when things are going well, when am I ever going to be having like what do I want to get out of this? It can't be about that. I don't know. Like if you I think sometimes like if you look at people like you get what you want in life, but like you get everything, right? So like do you want if you prioritize just like the financial success, is that at the expense of other things potentially, right? And so I think you have to just like keep paying attention and keep being really clear with yourself about what you want. One of the things I really want out of this experience, frankly, is just to I, this is my community. I've worked in the same industry now for 18 years. If I can, what I'd really like to do is just to make my little corner of the world a little bit better. So I do try to work with a lot of other, like I have a program called the Clean Beauty Summer School. One of my intentions around that really is because I want the face of the beauty industry to look different. Like when I was a kid growing up, I didn't see people that looked like me in images that were considered beautiful, right? There weren't models that were Asian. Um, and I think the more people of color we put into those positions, the more likely we are to see different aspirations of beauty. I also think it's really important that, like, I try to be, I'm not perfect by any means, but I think the fact that I've been an employee for a long time, I hope makes me a better manager. And I'm trying to role model for my team, hopefully, what it looks like to be a founder and a manager who can be empathetic and kind as well. Um, recently, one of the girls on my team, and I'm sure she meant it in all the nicest ways, she said to me, she's a young girl, and she said to me, Amy, I always thought that like being female and a CEO meant that you had to be like kind of masculine and that you couldn't have kids and you had to, be a certain type of a person. And I would actually argue in the past, I think I thought that too. And she was like, but I'm looking at you. And she's like, I think your kids really like you. I was like, well, I really hope so. So I don't know. I mean, I will say I'm not good at a lot of things. One of them being probably like I'm trying to do a better job of taking care of myself. I'm trying to do a better job of, I think, especially in COVID, I was not good about keeping in touch with my friends. I was really focused on just like family and work. Um, but I think as long as you just keep showing up, and being really conscious of what it is that you want in life.
Yes. Ugh, Amy. Well, this was amazing. I wish we could talk for more. We'll have to do it another time again, but it was such a joy having you on. So excited to see what you guys continue to build and the impact you're making in the industry. But it was such a joy. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Yasmin.